Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host for today's episode, and we're recording on a Tuesday morning, just a few hours really after Manchester United were hammered 4-0 at Crystal Palace down at Sellers Park in the capital. Samuel Luckhurst was at that game. He joins me on this podcast. Samuel, how are you, and what time did you get back to Manchester last night?
I got onto my drive at 3:37 in the morning, and amazingly, I don't feel too bad. I might not sound too good, but I don't feel too bad, and woke up just before 8 a.m. So probably overall, I think I definitely would have had less than 4 hours sleep, but I feel reasonably sprightly, despite another torrid night for United to witness and to cover.
It was an awful night for United, another one. You really felt sorry for the travelling fans who have had some terrible kickoff times in the last few weeks, and they just sung their hearts out the whole game. They were fantastic. They really deserved a better performance. That's now a 13th defeat this season, Samuel, in the Premier League. That is a club record. It's been such a poor campaign, and that was a terrible performance.
The white-shirted players waved the white flag. I think in the build-up to it felt a little bit similar to the Fulham defeat in February, in that a significant injury was confirmed the day before the game, and you just felt like they were the condemned and that they would lose, and they did, and they lost in a far worse way than they did against Fulham. I think with going back to Fulham very briefly, Rasmus Højlund was the injury they absolutely could not afford then. Going into last night's game, Harry Maguire was the injury they could absolutely not afford, and he became the latest fly to drop. That was compounded by Fernandes not recovering, McTominay not recovering in time to make the squad. And just when the squad arrived, looking at that United, the players coming into Selhurst Park, I just thought that I can't see them getting anything from this game, and I think that's a real worry for United. Another worry that they're going to a club that are very much firmly in the bottom half of the table, and I presume Palace will finish in the bottom half of the table. They've of course they've got some terrific players, but you were thinking that United will do exceptionally well to win here, and they never came close to it. As soon as the first goal went in, you kind of just braced for another awful night, and it's becoming difficult to really summarize how bad this United team is. I thought Jamie Carragher was brutal, but completely correct with a lot of what he said last night. From what I've come across, obviously I wasn't able to take in everything he said about United in his analysis, but that team last night was assembled for all the injuries, for all the absences. It was a team that cost £404.5 million. 9 of the players have been signed by Erik ten Hag or have made their essentially came to prominence or debuted under Ten Hag. I know Garnacho made his debut under Ralf Rangnick, but he's Ten Hag's legacy, if you like, or one of his academy legacies. I had a friend who was in the away end last night, and I messaged him on the way back and said, have you turned? And he said, absolutely not. And he said how poignant it was. That was the word he used. The scenes at the final whistle when the supporters were applauding the players and the players were lingering for quite a while to applaud the supporters. I mean, those players they did not deserve that support. And his rationale for it is that where there's an FA Cup final coming up, they don't want to turn on the players or the manager when there's such a huge game in 2 weeks on Sunday. And I completely get that, and there is an etiquette for it. And there have been times when United fans have been flicking V signs and raising their middle fingers at United players after getting beaten 4-0 in London, which is what happened after the Brentford game last season. And the circumstances were different. Last night was the worst result of the season. I'd say the Brentford defeat last season was the worst United result in a generation. But I think anyone who is still trying to make a case for Ten Hag to remain in situ for next season, they're in denial. I genuinely felt sorry for him. Just looking at him after the 4th goal went in last night, just stood motionless in the technical area with his hands stuffed into his pockets. it's amazing how lonely a manager can look in those circumstances where they are just stood in I don't know, a 6 by 12 yard perimeter on their own, a perimeter that's pretty much the size of a 6 yard box maybe, and he's got his staff just behind him, but he looked absolutely beaten. I had another friend who stayed in the same hotel that United checked into yesterday afternoon, and he saw them leaving, and that was the phrase he used about Ten Hag. He said he looked beat up, and then Palace meted out a hell of a beating in the evening.
United at 8th in the table. They've been leapfrogged by Chelsea and Newcastle over the weekend, who both won their games. Did the players down tools at Sellers Park, Samuel? I think all season we've criticised the performances in defeat, sometimes even in victory, and we've scrutinised the tactics and their shortcomings. But we've always said that the commitment's been there, and the players have still tried, and they've gave their all for the shirt. But there was a depressing sense of inevitability when that game started last night. I think we all feared a defeat, and United didn't really seem at the races from the first whistle. Is that fair?
Oh, that's completely fair, Stephen. And I think what makes this worse is that I don't think the players have down tools. I think they're just utterly incompetent. And as Carragher said, they're one of the worst coached teams in the league. And I can't disagree with that. You look at Oliver Glasner at Palace, he was appointed there less than 3 months ago. And the formation they play in, the players he's got, the form they're in, that is a coach very quickly stamping his authority on a team, and his fingerprints all over that team, as Emery's are at Villa, as Iraola's are at Bournemouth, as Postecoglou's are at Tottenham, as bad as they have been recently. And all those coaches have been appointed more recently at their clubs than Eric Ten Hag. And you look at United, and I know that there are always injuries to contend with, but that team still was assembled at a substantial cost last night. And it's like just handpicking a bunch of strangers, putting them together and seeing what they can do. The way Eze toyed with them, it was like it was just like watching a footballer with a bunch of kids in the playground, like going there for a foundation day, and the kids were competition winners. Only some of these kids were a 36-year-old and a 32-year-old. And of course, Johnny Evans clearly was not ready to start, and Ten Hag it was almost waving the white flag beforehand, because he said it wasn't the plan to start Evans. He thought, well, he's possibly getting an excuse in there early. And it was by far and away Evans' worst performance of the season. Mateta is not the most mobile of forwards, but he was made to look mobile. He made Evans look like a training code, the ease with which he just went past him. But the worst player on the pitch was Casemiro. And I know he's playing out of position, but he has played. He did play there against Coventry, Sheffield United, Burnley. So he'd had 270 minutes of experience playing there. And I know his partner changed, but the mistakes he made were just amateurish for the first goal and the fourth goal. He's, as I said last week, the FA Cup final could be his last dance in elite football, because his legs have gone. And even, as we discussed last week, Wan-Bissaka is clearly not a right back who can play at left back. And they played him at left back last night because they thought Elise plays there. But it's almost as if nobody at United factored in to account that Palace don't actually play with Eze and Elise, who are wingers, as traditional inverted wingers. They're playing in a 3-4-2-1 formation. So it's like having two playmakers off Mateta. And of course, all Elise did was he came centrally. Like with both of his goals, he's in a pretty much a central position rather than getting the ball on the wing. The first goal, which is an absolutely abominable piece of defending that is United in a microcosm this season. It's like, okay, if they want to play Wan-Bissaka over there, well, I'm here anyway. And there's no protection for the defence because it's Mainu and Eriksen again, which is a completely incompatible midfield partnership. And I don't know what Eriksen was doing out there. And then Casemiro clearly sees that there are major problems in front of him. He's trying to compensate for it as well, I think. And he is a defensive midfielder, of course. But he is making decisions he wouldn't make because he is panicking. And look what the end result was with that first goal. Nobody came out of that well last night. I mean, some of that fourth goal, I think the ball hits the middle of the net. And of course, when the ball hits the middle of the net, you think, how's the goalkeeper not saved that? And with Andre Onana, it must be beyond a dozen savable shots that he's let in this season. I'd say there were 2 last night. Mateta's was very, very powerful, but you're getting beaten at the near post. I think if that happens to David De Gea, we're saying he's been beaten at the near post again. The fourth goal is an absolute joke, how that somehow beats him. And when Edouard hit the post in added time, he stood motionless again.
He was almost stuck in the mud there, Onana. His left foot
Yeah, I
came
heard the
on his
commentary
boot as if he was
after.
stuck. Yeah, and he could have reacted, but he didn't. A bit of a weird performance, a bit of a weird error of
Yeah,
judgment maybe from Onana.
weird is. I think weird is a very good and succinct summary. Dalot has struggled against Palace wingers before, of course, mainly Zaha. Kobbie Mainoo has been effervescent for most of this season since he came back into the team, but he needs a strong and stable partner, and he doesn't have one. And as dire as Amrabat has been this season, you've got to find a right balance, and you've got to seek a different solution. Eriksen Mainoo is not a solution. I think we discussed this a few weeks ago about their games together, and was it Forest away, where of course Mainoo was hooked at half-time, and United lost 2-1 because there was a void in midfield in the second half. Tottenham in January, when Tottenham were the better team at Old Trafford in that 2-2 draw. Villa at home on Boxing Day, where Villa played into United's hands, but United played very well to get that comeback from 2-0 down at half-time. And then you've had these 3 games on the spin, where Sheffield United scored twice against United, Burnley scored once against them, and really should have scored at least 3 goals, maybe more. They had brilliant chances. And if you keep on taking chances, you're going to get hiding at some time or another. Palace in form, brilliant forwards. Monday night at Selhurst Park, you could see it coming. I mean, Ten Hag said last night he thought it was out of the blue because United had only lost 4 league games this calendar year. I don't think any person of a betting persuasion, as you well know, would have backed United to win that game last night. I think a lot of people saw it coming that they were going to get quite easily beaten.
Crystal Palace were actually the heavy favourites, actually quite short price to check the odds before the game. Ten Hag keeps talking about the calendar year, which he's forgetting. A season is a season. It's not in a calendar year, which is bizarre. He's looking at the results in 2024. I think with that first goal, there's a few points to make. I mean, one, it came from a throw-in, which is absolutely unforgivable. Eriksen's positioning was really poor. I think United fans know something is really wrong when they're agreeing with Jamie Carragher, but he made the point in his analysis after the game that Eriksen should be 5 yards back and providing Mainoo with support. And then Wan-Bissaka's out of position as well. There should be some communication there with Mainoo to actually address that problem. And then, as you said, Samuel Casemiro panics, he steps up and he dives in. But I think over the last few months, that's been creeping into his game a lot more. When we've been at games and we've pointed that out, and he's been kind of flying into reckless challenges, completely missed timing.
The Bournemouth tackle.
I referenced that in a piece. I referenced that in my lunch piece at Bournemouth. Yeah, so it's incredible, really, to see Casemiro decline that much. I was going to get into individual performances in the second half, but we'll just end this first part by discussing Casemiro in a bit more detail, because he's just been so poor. Samuel, he's been a passenger, and he is playing out of position at centre half, but he's just not doing the basics right. And that performance at Selhurst Park, that's his worst United shirt. Yeah, it was a disgrace, wasn't it? It was so poor. The first goal, he was culpable, and obviously the fourth, just bullied to the floor. And then when Palace hit the post, it almost happened again. He was dispossessed so easily.
Yeah, he's on his last legs, and we've said for a while that this has got to be his last season. Again, it does go back to the poor planning in the summer where they signed the wrong midfielder. It was a midfield mismatch, Casemiro and Mount, and Wolves exposed that in the first game of the season. And Ten Hag has been incapable of finding a solution there. Of course, Mainoo came in November, and you knew, given his potential and how well he started off, that when Casemiro regained fitness, because Casemiro was out with a hamstring problem at the time, that when he was back, it had to be Mainoo and Casemiro as the midfield. That was clearly their most compatible compatible midfield and their best midfield. But that's not been an outright success by any stretch of the imagination. It will clearly, and it has to be the midfield in the FA Cup final, I think. Again, Casemiro has been playing out of position, so we have to take that into account. But it still doesn't account for some of the mistakes he's making. And as we've said before, Ten Hag, when they signed Amrabat, we didn't have another number 6 last season. We've got another number 6 now, but he is never ever starting that number 6, and I can see why, because Amrabat is hopeless at Premier League level. I think we all knew about 4 or 5 months ago he's out of his depth. He shouldn't have been signed. Just really bad recruitment from United, going for a player essentially on the back of a major tournament, and on the strength that he played for the manager once upon a time at the might of FC Utrecht in the Eredivisie, and he was playing, and he's still contracted to a mediocre team in Serie A, a league that has been in decline for a long time, that has not been one of the top leagues for several years, probably the best part of 20 years, I would say. So if I can see that, you can see that, why are they going ahead with a deadline day move and parting with 10 million euros as a loan fee to bring that player in? But the dull thing is that he's been worth starting recently, because the situation in midfield is so dire. And also, he didn't start in midfield last night, but Mason Mount starts as a number 10 in the first game that Bruno Fernandes has ever missed through injury. Fernandes suggested last week that he could be open to moving on in the summer. He turns 30 in September. So you think, when you take all that into account, how topical it is, what a good opportunity this is for Mason Mount on his first Premier League start in 7 months. I was not remotely surprised that he didn't turn up, because, as I've consistently said, United should never have signed him, whether he's in midfield, whether he's a playmaker. And I know he will be definitively judged after next season, as I think you can always give a player a second year as that, that they're on trial effectively if they've not had a good first season, and that's putting it mildly with him. But he is not a young player. He is 25. He's played in a Euros final, a Champions League final, Club World Cup final, FA Cup final, League Cup final. He's an extremely experienced player, but he should just not have been signed by Manchester United. He should not have been given the number 7. And last night was a big opportunity for him. He didn't take it. And if Fernandes, hopefully for United, Fernandes is fit and fine for Sunday, he absolutely walks into that team.
To play devil's advocate, Samuel, is it not difficult for any player to come into that side, which is just so dysfunctional and struggling and going backwards, and to perform? Mount's task was very difficult last night, wasn't it, coming into that team and to actually make an impact? I agree, he didn't take his chance, but everyone on the pitch underperformed. I think if you put Cantona on that team, he'd probably struggle as well. Might do a kung fu kick as well. He'd be frustrated at Selhurst Park, but the way it was going.
Yeah. I completely take your point, and you just thinking of that front four last night, how individualistic it was, how they didn't gel whatsoever. There were no patterns of play, just dreadful. But there was only one change from that front four from the Burnley game, and Mount has been fit for 6 or 7 weeks. He's been training with them. I know it's a different environment on a match day, but given that Fernandes was a doubt going back a long way last week and wasn't training, they'll have known for the best part of a week, or they'll have planned for the best part of a week, that Mount was going to play in that role, probably behind Højlund with Antony and Garnacho as the wingers. But I mean, it's not all on Mount. I agree. I mean, Højlund, he broke his duck against Sheffield United. 6-game duck against Sheffield United the other week, but that was another lame duck of a performance from him. Antony,
all sections of the team,
scored
they all seem quite disconnected, don't they? I mean, you've got the defensive line,
they do, yeah.
You've got the attackers. They don't seem like a team, and that's I think, quite clear from the first whistle. And as I said, there was a depressing sense of inevitability really for me when the game started, and you thought United aren't winning this.
No, no. As I said, I'd have been surprised if anyone predicted United were going to win. Yeah, that little 7-year-old Francis, who was participating in the half-time penalty competition, and he was asked, did he enjoy the first half, and said, no, not really. But at least he hit the back of the net with his shot, so he was in better form than any of the United players last night.
Well, I asked you, could he play at centre half? So we'll pick that up in the second part. But that'll be it for the first part. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, did you say that lad's name was Harrison? Am I remembering that correctly from literature?
No, Francis.
Francis, there you go, messed up.
Francis.
Well, maybe Francis could play at centre back for United over the next few games because Casemiro has been playing there and he's been awful, and options have been heavily depleted. In all seriousness, you've got Louis Jackson on the bench, who probably isn't too much older than Francis. He's 18 years old. He's not made his senior debut yet, but it has got to the stage now, Samuel, where Casemiro has been that poor. It would be the definition of madness to start him at centre half again. And you're probably going to have to look at someone like Jackson to come into the side. It's not ideal, but I think it might have to happen.
Or you have to get a bit more. You have to get a bit more creative with someone else. I think a different coach would have just taken someone from a different position and put them there, and it would have worked out. I mean, Sir Alex Ferguson, a few times he had to play Michael Carrick there, and although there was some failures, I remember Fulham away in December 2009, and the opening game in 2012-13 when Marouane Fellaini bullied them at Goodison Park, but there was some merit to playing Carrick there because he was tall, he was good on the ball. His reading of the game was pretty excellent. So I think that they've got to consider that. I mean, the next game on Sunday is still a relatively long way off, and United. It doesn't matter in terms of a defender coming back from injury and they've not played before. Unfortunately they are going to have to just take that risk in terms of starting a returning defender from injury, provided Evans hasn't had any setbacks. He'll have more training sessions under his belt. So there's one centre back. Martinez, Lindelof, or Varane, they've all got to be pushing to return sooner or later, because there are cup final places to play for. Nobody knows what that United defence is going to look like in the FA Cup final. I think there's one nailed-on starter in that back four, which is Dalot. But the other ones, you're hoping in a best-case scenario, Martinez, Shaw, probably Varane over Maguire now, given that Maguire is not going to play again in the league this season by the sounds of things, and it would be a bit of a push for him to start an FA Cup final, 4 weeks after last playing. But Ten Hag he's not shown much innovation trying to find solutions in midfield, and in defence, it's the state of play in defence is actually a lot worse than it seems, because they've got is 7 defenders out injured. So Malacia, Shaw, Lindelof, Varane, Martinez, Maguire, and Cambuala. And then you've got 3 other defenders who are older and more senior than the defenders on the bench, who cannot be included because they were registered at clubs on loan in January. Reece Bennett, who went to Stockport and I think only played once, but he's played for another club this season, so he can't play for United. He's ineligible. Sonny Joffrey was it was one of those work experience loans at Altrincham. I don't think he ever played for Altrincham. And it was the same with Sam Murray, who's a left back. He had one of those work experience loans with Rochdale, never played for them. So they're currently without 10 defenders who would probably or possibly be on the bench ahead of Habib Boganay or Harry Amas or Louis Jackson. Reece Bennett was on the bench at West Ham just before Christmas. Sam Murray starting the Youth Cup final winning side in 2022. I think Sonny Joffrey was part of the squad that evening, he might have been on the bench. So those three are more experienced than the under 18s who've been on the bench this season. But they literally cannot be used because they're ineligible. They can be used in training, as we've seen for a number of weeks. They can play for the under 21s, but they can't play for the first team because of the January the winter window loan registrations. I mean, as far as the weekend goes, it depends if he's back, but McTominay at least has experience of playing in defence.
Yeah, I
If
mean,
they
obviously,
need
as
someone
you've
like
said,
that, but it's another player returning from injury.
Lindelof and Martinez, hopefully one of them will be back at least. But in this scenario, and I'm going to force you to give us an answer, if there was a choice to be made between a very young and raw Louis Jackson, who hasn't made his debut, and Casemiro, I'd actually lean towards Jackson. And it is a bold shout, but I'd rather have a young player playing his natural position than Casemiro at this point, on the back of that performance at Sellers Park. You think back to Louis van Gaal, who did it quite often, didn't he? He'd rather play
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
young players in their natural positions than play players out of position. I think there is merit as well in maybe Amrabat at centre half. He would probably be more suited to the role than Casemiro, even though he is really not convinced in signing on loan.
he's played at fullback, hasn't he, Amrabat? And
Yeah.
was it his one and only good game for United was at left back against Crystal Palace in the game that Palace couldn't care less about in the League Cup, and a few days later they beat United at Old Trafford. I mean, it's McTominay has the attributes. He's physical. He's athletic. He's an imposing figure, and he's played at centre half for club and country. But the caveat is that two caveats. He is very much an attacking midfielder now, and also he'd be coming back from injury. So I think I'm sure the media team at United, they'll be hoping that when they post pictures from the next training session at Carrington this week, that there'll be a few players back from injury just to lift the mood around the place. I mean, they need more players, and of course, when you suffer 64 cases of injury or illness in a season that cause a player to miss a match, that is going to have a detrimental impact on the team's form, and it has done. It's had a profound impact on United's season. But they shouldn't be signing certain players who are not robust enough. I know he's fit at the moment, but Mount was having injury issues at Chelsea last season. He's missed a huge chunk of this season to the point that he was making his first league start in 7 months on Monday evening. The training sessions have been an issue. Players feel as though that has exacerbated or aggravated injuries. The medical staff needs gutting, probably. Ten Hag didn't bring his own fitness coach with him, which I think, in hindsight, is a big factor as well. The current fitness coach, Charlie Owen, was promoted from the academy on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's watch about 5 years ago. They need to scrutinise his role. I know it sounds very harsh, but if you're Manchester United, you want to be the best in class, and you want to be the best in England and the best in Europe again. You need the best, and they don't have that. So, I completely. Everyone understands the injuries, but we have spoken about them chapter and verse. That you can't just use that excuse every time. You've got to try and get to the bottom of it. You've got to get to the root to it. Gary O'Driscoll, he's not been seen on the bench since the Bournemouth game. And he wasn't there again last night. It was the physio Richard Merrin and Dr. Jim Moxon, who are the medical personnel present again.
There will undoubtedly be an element of rotten luck in there. There will be some science behind it as well, of course. There definitely will be in training regimes and stuff like that. But there must be, surely, isn't there, Samuel, with how many injuries they've actually sustained this season? It's been unrelenting. We'll go back to individual performances. We did the podcast last week, and we did keep or sell, basically, going through the squad and arguing whether we would keep or sell players. And I made a case to extend Johnny Evans' contract by 12 months. For the second goal, he looked like exactly what he is, isn't he? Didn't he? Like a 36-year-old centre half coming up against the Premier League's most informed striker who just skipped past him and rifled past Onana. He was really poor for that goal. I felt sorry for him, to be fair. But again, United shouldn't be having a 36-year-old Johnny Evans starting these games, should they? Which has been poor planning, bad luck, a mix of both, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think Ten Hag would have expected him to have played as often as he has this season, just because he was signed as almost an insurance defender to come into the matchday squad or to get the odd game to give a player a breather. But he's played way more than anybody expected. And as I said earlier, I think Ten Hag, when he said that they weren't planning to start him, but Maguire got injured, it was almost like we're getting an excuse in here already, a reasonably valid excuse. I mean, I asked him at his press conference afterwards whether, and I think he maybe got the wrong end of the stick of it, because I wasn't being critical of Evans, but I just said because of Evans's lack of rhythm and his conditioning, did that compromise United's plans for the game? And he expressed huge respect for Evans, but also said that he couldn't play to the levels that he normally does because he only had 2 days of training. And when you're a 36-year-old, he'd have played probably 20 minutes in the best part of 2 months, I'd have said. Those 20 minutes coming away to Chelsea. 36-year-old, 2 days of training against a very vibrant front three. You're liable to look like a lamb to the slaughter, and he certainly was.
And you think fair play for, I guess when you put it like that, fair play for making it throughout the 90 minutes, I suppose. I did say to our editor when the teams were confirmed that I'd be surprised if Evans made it through because of that lack of training, but he did. Amrabat was introduced for Anthony after the hour mark. We've discussed Amrabat, but I mean, Anthony Samuel, £86 million. We've discussed him, I guess, chapter and verse in this podcast throughout this season, but he had this kind of few weeks of promising performances. His Stamford Bridge performance in the Chelsea defeat was fantastic, but that's proved to be a false dawn, and he's regressed to the player that we thought he was. A very disappointing, incredibly disappointing signing. He's just been a disastrous transfer, hasn't he, really?
Yeah, I don't know what more there is to say about him. It was a false dawn, but the goal against Liverpool, the performance against Chelsea, the very well taken goal against against Burnley as well. But when you look at that attack and you consider his age, his profile, his experience under Ten Hag as well. This is the 4th season that he's played under Ten Hag. He should be leading that attack. Really, he should be taking ownership of it, lifting it. We all saw how influential Elise was, playing who plays an identical role, similar role at Crystal Palace, and he just does not get out. He's completely out of kilter. I mean, everyone's out of kilter, but he's just out of kilter with United. He's not a United player in the very essence of it, and never has been. He was really bad at Palace last season when he was just running down blind alleys. He was collecting the ball on the halfway line, making wrong decisions. Just his positioning was a problem. His lack of vision was a problem. But he was way worse last night. And that game last season was in late January, I think. So we're what, 15 months along down the line, and there's no debate regarding Anthony. He is worse. He's been worse this season than he was last season, and he's still starting. You look at Ahmad, and I know Ten Hag clearly doesn't think that he should be getting a look in, but Anthony shouldn't be getting a look in. So logically, you just give Ahmad a go, and he's in danger, Ahmad, of if he is to start this season, it will be a meaningless start, because United's next 3 games, including the cup final as well, they are playing teams. They have not beaten any of these teams this season. They lost to Arsenal. Newcastle have done a number on them twice. Brighton have had their number in the league, beaten them in the past 4 games. City have done the double over them this season. as I said, a friend told me after the
You have the
Burnley
fucking
draw.
cheeks, don't you? It's ominous that,
A
you know,
friend told me
you
after the
really
Burnley
say.
draw, he thought that was the last. That might be the last time United get a point this season, and even I didn't think it would necessarily be that bad. But it's looking like a prescient call after last night.
United could have scored. They were 2-0 down, and Rasmus Højlund put the ball in the back of the net, but he was deemed to have fouled Dean Henderson, former United goalkeeper. What was your view on that, Samuel? I actually thought, contrary to what a lot of people said, I thought it was incredibly soft. I'm not surprised it was ruled out, because that's just what happens in football when the goalkeeper is even slightly touched, but nonetheless, I still think it was soft.
When I got in last night, I had a quick look at the highlights package, and I think Alan Smith said that if that's two outfield players, nothing is given. And I know that's a very different context and a very different duel, and it is always supplied differently with a goalkeeper. I understood the decision when I saw the replay of it. I thought there's no way that's going to get overturned. I thought Højlund was, unsurprisingly for him, quite naive in that he didn't need to do it. He could have been a bit cuter. I think if you've got, I'm going to mention his name, if you've got Harry Kane, he's probably doing it a bit cuter and still causing the keeper to make an error, but the goal is given. It was weak goalkeeping from Henderson, and he felt the slightest touch went down. It was kind of like it was a continental foul, but I was very, very relieved that Ten Hag didn't moan about or even mention that decision at his post-match press conference, because the last thing we should be talking about after last night is a refereeing decision. Højlund just needs to
It's the
he needs
curse,
to
Samuel.
be
Ten Hag said
cleverer.
it's the curse. The curse has continued.
Oh
The
God,
curse is at fault for the 4-0
Jesus.
loss at Selhurst Park. It's the curse's fault. We'll leave it there for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel got back to Manchester in the early hours of the morning, but he works harder than the devil, this man, and he's written an article this morning on Jose Mourinho. Would you like to expand on that piece, Samuel?
Yes, Mourinho would walk to Manchester, what I was told, to manage United again. He knows Jim Ratcliffe, which isn't a surprise given that they frequent the same area of London, West London. So their paths will have doubtless crossed at some point or another. Jim Ratcliffe has Mourinho's number, but Mourinho is convinced that United don't want him. So it's kind of like it puts that case to bed quite quickly. I don't feel though that it's foreseeable that United will reappoint a manager that they dismissed 5.5 years ago. But Mourinho is a big name. He's still got cachet. He's of course available, and I suppose if you want to play devil's advocate, is what manager would you want in the dugout for an FA Cup final against Manchester City? I suspect quite a lot of United fans would find the image of Mourinho in the technical area next to Guardiola quite appealing. But I certainly don't think that United will be going down that road.
Do you think it would be a good appointment then, on a personal level, from your opinion? Because from my perspective, we all love Jose, don't we? I'll call him by his first name. His press conferences, his quotes, his charisma, his personality is fantastic. He's just box office, really. And he's been box office ever since leaving United. And when you look back in the post-Sir Alex Ferguson years, he was objectively the best manager and the most successful, and probably should have been given more resources towards the end, of course. But he's past his sell-by date for me now, is he not? He has been at the top level. He's not anymore. And I think an appointment of Mourinho now at United would be a regression, especially, like you said, a step back to 2018.
I think some of us on the United beat up here would be buying champagne and popping corks if he was reappointed, because he is box office. He is great value, whether he's a manager, whether he's a pundit. whether he's appearing in a betting advert as he did that time in between jobs. Unsurprisingly, it turns out he's a very fine actor as well. I think United could do a lot worse. You look at some of the names that are on the bookies chalkboards as the odds continue to change as to who could replace Ten Hag, and I would absolutely take Mourinho over the majority of them. And look, he may feel as though he would have unfinished business at United, given that his trajectory was very good after 2 seasons. They had a good first season, winning the League Cup and the Europa League. It was a progressive, but not a successful second season, climbing up from 6th to 2nd in the Premier League table, reaching the FA Cup final. And then that sagacious footballing mind, Ed Woodward, decided to stop backing Jose Mourinho, who's won 2 Champions Leagues and managed Real Madrid and Inter Milan and Chelsea and was the manager of Manchester United. It's amazing that you just consider that statement. Ed Woodward thought he knew better than Jose Mourinho at Manchester United, and look what happened. They had a disastrous summer, and I think we all knew and sensed, especially those of us who were present for that pre-season tour in the United States, covering the club from LA to Miami. We all knew that it was a matter of time until Mourinho and United parted ways, and they did very suddenly just before Christmas. So I think it would be an extraordinary story if he was to return. It's not a coincidence that if you look at his career, the only club where he's not won a trophy is at Tottenham. And that's more on Tottenham than Mourinho. They decided it was a great idea to put Ryan Mason in charge for a cup final rather than Mourinho that time in 2021 for the League Cup final. He did certainly at Roma. He had 2 good seasons, by and large, winning the Conference League and getting to the Europa League final and only losing on penalties to Sevilla. So I can't lie. I would love to see him back at United because the guy is box office. He's the entertainment value would be extremely high. I suspect the fan base would be pretty split, and I genuinely don't think he will be the next United manager. As I've written in the copy this morning, that he's convinced United don't want him, and United have not given any indication that he's under consideration. So I think we can, as I said, it's the case has been opened and closed quite quickly.
Well, you should never go back to your ex-girlfriend, should you? And that's what it would feel like with Jose Mourinho, and also his style of play. It's just quite negative and pragmatic, and yes, it's got results over the years, but I think as the games evolve,
I don't think it was. I'm not sure. I think that's. I really do think that's a bit of a myth. That, yes, there are more.
Like
there are more.
The angel, and then Mourinho's like the devil, and Mourinho still gets the results, but in a different manner.
It is, but I'd say that there's, I'd say City are pretty tedious to watch just because of the sheer dominance of the ball they have, and I think Liverpool under Klopp have been the more watchable team because there's that, as Klopp says, there's that heavy metal approach to it, and I think it's a bit more ruthless. And
but do you think
with
Mourinho
City, it's like the orchestra. I think you've seen with the way some of his teams have played. They've played very exciting football. I know I'm going back a long time with the Madrid team, but they scored 100-odd goals one season in La Liga. When he went back to Chelsea, you had Hazard in full flight, Diego Costa, Cesc Fabregas. I don't think they're defensive-minded players. United played some excellent football under him. I think people forget how often. I mean, United, I think, under Ten Hag, have scored 4 goals in maybe 3 or 4 games. Under Mourinho in his second season, they won 4-0 or scored 4 goals in, must have been close to double figures that season. The first 2 games of the season, they won 4-0. There were a lot of 4-goal wins for them. So I think it is overplayed. And lest we forget, one of United's worst results in the Premier League era was 6-1 thumping at home to Tottenham. And who was the Tottenham manager? It was Mourinho. So he is a manager who knows there's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Ferguson was similar as well. The amount of times United got gritty wins or ground it out through a season and just to get over the line. winning is the name of the game. So I think they were maybe more similar than people, Ferguson and Mourinho. I think they were maybe a bit more similar in their approach than people give them credit to. It wasn't just always champagne football under Sir Alex Ferguson at United.
Subjective, isn't it? I think the game's probably moved on now, and I do consider maybe a bit harshly that Mourinho is yesterday's man. And importantly, I actually don't think his football style of play would align with what Ratcliffe wants. We don't actually know yet, but I do think from the comments that he has said on record that does suggest to a more proactive, modern style of play. He's talked about Manchester City and the way they dominate their opponents. So I think United could play like that in the future, depending who they get as manager, of course, if and when Ten Hag is sacked. And that's a nice little segue to Thomas Tuchel, who is available at the end of the season, Samuel. There's been reports in Germany suggesting Bayern Munich have contacted Eric Ten Hag. It would be a bit of a bizarre swap, wouldn't it, for Bayern Munich and Manchester United to swap managers at the end of the season?
Yeah, possibly logical. I think, I can't remember if it was you I was talking to about it or someone else, but someone did say maybe a month ago that maybe it's in the interests of Ten Hag and Tuchel to do a job swap. And the way Tuchel spoke about United at Old Trafford in December was very, very, he was very glowing, very effusive about them, talking about the history, because he knows, and he'd have had a sense by then as well, that he wasn't going to be at Bayern Munich for the long term, or certainly next season, and of course he won't be. And if there's a league that Tuchel's style is suited to, it's the Premier League. And what club? There is only one club in the Premier League that would appoint him and or would be available and worthy of him, and that's Manchester United. So he was fluttering his eyelashes back in December. And of course, Ten Hag has a connection to Bayern Munich from coaching their reserve team while Guardiola was there back in the early 2010s, I think it was. So I think Bayern Munich could do a lot worse than Ten Hag. I think maybe Ten Hag would be, despite the way things have gone this season, he'd be going into a club that have a good structure, have got better players than United. He's familiar with the way Bayern operate. I don't think, if you're considering Ralf Rangnick as a coach, then you absolutely have to consider Eric Ten Hag, because Ten Hag would be a far more suitable and better appointment, in my opinion. So I don't think the prospects would be negative for either coach or either club. I think Tuchel would be a very probably of the likely candidates to replace Ten Hag. I would say that he's the one that really should be seriously considered. And I know there'll be United fans who are stuck in a time warp and think that, oh, but he's not longevity. We won't have him for 9 years or 26 years or stuff like that. If United want to be still bracketed with Bayern Munich and Real Madrid and Barcelona, their supporters and some of the people at the club have got to accept that sacking or changing managers is not always, it doesn't always have to be seismic. If you want to stay at the top and if something is broken, you've got to fix it. And there are still some at United who get wistful about the Sir Alex Ferguson era, the Sir Matt Busby era, because of course those two, they had epochs at United. They were there that long, but the game has changed. And Bayern Munich go through managers very, very regularly. They change managers probably on average every 2 years. Real Madrid have got to be similar. Barcelona, not too much different either. They are, I'd say, the three of the four biggest clubs in the world, the fourth being United. If United want to be principled and accept appalling standards of 13 Premier League defeats, possibly finishing 8th, they've suffered 18 defeats already this season. That's the most in a single season they've had since 1977-78. If they want to accept those standards, then they're not going to get anywhere. I mean, that is the mentality of losers. And I've never ever thought that people of United persuasion want to be losers. The aim is winning is the name of the game, effectively. And United haven't been winning anywhere near enough in the past 10 years. And you look at that performance on Monday night, you look at the evidence this season, the way the season's gone, it's broken. So you've got to fix it.
I mean, you look at the last 10 years, though, since Ferguson's retired, and the average shelf life of a manager at United has been 2 years, really, hasn't it? It's been 5 different managers, permanent managers. You've obviously thrown Ralph Rangnick into the mix as well on an interim basis. There's obvious red flags over Tuchel. I mean, we've talked about these again on previous podcasts. I mean, he stumbled to the Bundesliga title last season on the final day because Dortmund bottled it. He's obviously not won the Bundesliga this season with Bayer Leverkusen dancing to the title. They've been fantastic. And he's obviously signed Harry Kane as well, and he's still been only able to win the league. So when you kind of throw all that into the equation and think about his style of play, the formation that he actually likes to play with, 5 at the back, does that fit in with the United way? Does that matter?
They play 5 at the back, Bayern?
Well, the Bayern do, but he has in the Premier League, hasn't he, Tuchel?
Yeah, he did with Chelsea. Sorry. Possibly, but I don't know.
It's a good
it
point.
did work. It did work for Chelsea.
Yeah. When I think of Tuchel, I think he's synonymous with 5 at the back, but that's probably because I'm biased towards his time in England when you watch that Chelsea team, Champions League, etc. But it kind of hints at the wider narrative, Samuel. There's no perfect candidate to succeed Ten Hag.
No, but Pochettino wasn't perfect when it looked like he was going to get the job in 2019 or 2021, because in 2019 he'd still not won a major trophy. In 2021, the only thing he'd won as a coach was with PSG, so you kind of disregard that. Is anybody going to make a serious case for Gareth Southgate over Thomas Tuchel? Roberto De Zerbi, I genuinely think he was probably far too overhyped. Did brilliant work with Brighton last season, but he has been extremely erratic this season, and Brighton have underachieved. For Brighton to be in the bottom half of the table, that's not a success given how good they've been in the past couple of years and the quality they have in that team, that squad. I just, if as we both agree and we've said before, if you're making this excuse that there's not an outstanding candidate out there, so we can't sack him for that, that is a really weak excuse not to change manager. I mean, looking at the odds at the moment, Tuchel, Southgate, Potter, De Zerbi, Zidane, Nagelsmann, McKenna, Lopetegui. I mean, Lopetegui, I don't know why he's on there. Flick, Emery, Amorim, Iraola, Carrick, Mourinho, Marcelo Gallardo. Sorry, I've never actually heard of him. Forgive my ignorance.
Is it a Spanish dish?
It looks more Italian, but I'm gonna have to double check now. But yeah, apologies to. They'll probably appoint him as United manager now, just to spite me.
I'm gonna get cancelled.
No, it's very Italian sounding, but he is the manager of Saudi Pro League club Al Ittihad. So I think we can. Okay. I think we're forgiven for not having a clue who he is. He may have played against England at the World Cup for Argentina. He does look a little bit familiar. But I mean, Kieran McKenna, I think he'll get a top job one day. I think that step from Ipswich to United it'd be idealistic, but I'd take Kieran McKenna over Graham Potter or Gareth Southgate, 100%. I think he deserves to be ahead of them in the queue, but sometimes you've just got to. What they should have done with Mourinho is they should have appointed him in 2013, but Ferguson was far too much of an egotist to allow that to happen. So he appointed someone who was Scottish and synonymous with longevity, and look how that turned out. And I genuinely think if they'd appointed Mourinho in 2013, they'd have won the league because they had an experienced squad. He'd have demanded 2 or 3 fresh signings. The players would have respected him. The competitiveness in the Premier League was not that great then either. Arsenal also ran. City were the big threat because they had a reasonable summer recruitment under Pellegrini. Liverpool came out of nowhere that season as well. I think Mourinho at United, they'd have won the title in 2013-14 but that's on Ferguson for, as I said, anointing his compatriot. But if they also had got him in, it would have been right. Okay, he's short term, but look at our squad. Let's try and maximise the short-termism of this squad with Ferdinand, Vidic, Evra, Van Persie, all in their 30s. Giggs was still knocking around as well. Let's try and maximise them for 2 or 3 more years, and then let's go for someone maybe more longer term. But they didn't have a plan. They just went off the say-so of Ferguson, and he got it very wrong. And I think they're in a little bit of a similar situation here, where you can't be choosing. Okay, you might appoint someone who's going to be there for 2 or 3 years. And yes, Tuchel can be a nightmare to deal with. He's combustible. He'll butt heads. But he's a driven bloke. And wherever he's gone, he has won things. And he has managed at big clubs. Dortmund, big club in Germany. Bayern Munich, one of the biggest clubs in the world. PSG, there are huge demands there. And he's the only one who has got them to a Champions League final. That, of course, could change this week. And Chelsea, he won the Champions League with them. You can't turn your nose up at a CV like that, especially when the alternatives are Gareth Southgate and Graham Potter.
And you know what? Thomas Tuchel's got over Roberto De Zerbi, and this is absolutely crucial in my opinion. He doesn't use wet look gel for his hair, which I think is just so important when you're considering your managerial appointment. Apologies to any listeners who do use wet look gel. That's just
he does look like he's on. He does look like he's on MTV in 1999. Roberto De Zerbi, I'll give him that. Maybe a Europop band from the 90s. He's got that look down to a T.
He definitely does. Thanks for your time, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And thanks to the listeners. Hopefully that is some therapy after last night's result.
Cathartic.
We'll be back on Friday. Yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back on Wednesday, maybe Wednesday and Friday actually. Of course, look ahead to the Arsenal game. So take care. Have a great week.